But here we are. So welcome. Today we are having what is the third in what we're calling our summer webinar learning series with a specific focus on envisioning an evidence-based education ecosystem. Now, if you've been joining us so far this summer, you know that this third in our series is focusing on district level education. And it's following a really vibrant discussion with two state leaders looking at a state level conversation about an evidence-based education ecosystem and a national level conversation with two national leaders. So today we're drilling down a bit and focusing on the district. So let me take just a moment to introduce you to the Learn Network itself. I want to make sure you know that who is funding our conversation today, made this possible. So the Learn Network itself is a grant funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. And it's funded to aid us to support scaling evidence-based practices and programs that accelerate learning. So through the Learn Network, we are facilitating capacity building for education researchers and developers, and we are also creating engaging activities with educators to support bridging research to practice. And ultimately, we want to build useful evidence-based products that can achieve widespread and sustainable impact. So quickly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Victoria Schaefer. I'm honored to be the moderator for our series and happy to be with you today and grateful that you chose to spend an hour with us this Tuesday afternoon. I work at SRI. I am in the Teacher Quality and Systems Reform Division, which really fits our topic for the summer series quite well. I have a long history of working to bridge research and practice. I presently lead a portfolio of grants that are focused on building school community partnerships, which I believe we need more and more of, and carrying out training for all school staff on how to better support students' learning needs. You might think about that in today's terms as focusing in on the learning sciences themselves. So I formerly led the Regional Educational Laboratory for Appalachia. I'm grateful to be joined today by Chris Jones, and I want to take just a minute to introduce Chris. Let me stop sharing my screen. You all can see Chris a bit better. So Chris is the executive director of the Virginia Association for Training, Learning, and Leading. Chris is a former classroom teacher and school leader who learned from the ground up what it takes to reach students and to lead grown-ups, our adults. Chris knows the strengths of our teachers and our students, and he understands what they are bringing into the classroom every day. And Chris has dedicated his whole career to wanting to leverage the strengths that they bring and to applying the evidence we built for what works. Chris is known as a visionary leader. He has a strong track record of developing professional development programs that have statewide reach. Especially relevant for today's conversation, Chris has prior experience guiding projects and the approach for one of the regional educational laboratories. Those regional ed laboratories historically have been funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and Chris's specific experience is serving on the board of REL Appalachia. Chris also has early career military service, and I always see that kind of shining through in some of the comments that Chris makes. And Chris comes to this conversation with a deep understanding of what I call education from the inside out. And that makes him particularly well suited to help paint a portrait of what an evidence based education ecosystem should look like. I want to acknowledge that we have a second guest who was going to be joining us today who has been delayed, and I'm not sure whether or not that guest can make it. If so, he will join us, and Chris and I will welcome him at whatever time he becomes available, and he will just join the conversation wherever we are at that time. So before we go live to the conversation itself, I want to just do a little bit of context setting, and I'll be brief. So, Chris, I want to acknowledge that I invited you to come to this conversation, and I said I want us to meet the moment. And for me, I want to set up that moment and say that three things are happening at the same time that don't necessarily go together. In my mind, and I know you and I had a conversation to prep for this, and so I'll just name those three things. We live in a time where our federal government, some of our state governments, and foundations have spent a lot of money to the tune of millions of dollars building evidence for what works. And so we have even a What Works clearinghouse where, in theory, district and school leaders and people like you leading at a state level can go and find out what we know works for how to teach math and reading and how to improve school climate. So we have that evidence built up. I want to also acknowledge that we are living in times of fast-paced innovation. We are seeing rapid change in how we teach and how students can learn. And then the third piece I want to put on the table that really adds to the puzzle is earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Education released NAEP scores, National Assessment of Education Progress, from tests from last year, 2024 data. So it's pretty current. That showed that our students in 4th and 8th grade reading and math haven't made a lot of progress, or haven't made any progress since pre-pandemic years. So we're looking at 5 years where we're like, oh my goodness, we've gone back in time. And so that to me is the defining moment we're in. We have innovation, and that innovation is poised to make a lot of change. We have research that shows what works and how to teach. And we also know that our student achievement is either questionable at best or declining in the last 5 years in this exact moment where there's so much promise. So I want the two of us to have this conversation today about meeting this moment and saying, we know that a future lies ahead where we have an evidence-based education ecosystem where all our students thrive and are prepared to live up to their highest potential. And that, Chris, is where I want to start this conversation. And I want to start it small. I want to work with you to paint a picture. I want to ask you, if I were to limit you, and I know this is tough because you have so much to say, but Chris, if I limit you to say open by describing students in a future evidence-based education ecosystem where every student is thriving and has what it takes to live to their highest potential. Chris, 1 to a few words to describe students in that future system.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. I do have one word that I'm thinking of, and I'll give it to you in just 1 second. I want to say thank you for allowing me to share space with you in this moment, the moment that you talked about. I want to also just say thank you for reaching out to me and trusting me with this great responsibility to talk through what we're talking about from the district. In Virginia, we call them divisions, but from the district level, that future of education-based system. So to to just really boil it down to one word and what I think about in a future evidence-based education ecosystem for our students, I think of the word um, to describe our students in that future state as connected. I'm going to stop and just say my one word is connected.
Okay. I love it. I love it. And I can see it. I can feel it. So now, I would like for you to take the next step. Hopefully, all the folks who are with us, all the people who will watch this recording, will also resonate with that one word, connected. So take us to the next level and paint the picture of that evidence-based education ecosystem. And I'm going to just take a step back and listen to what you say.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. And I'm just going to build off that word connected. I think it's so important that students feel the connection of self to the things that they do, the environments in which they learn, grow, and live, and then also the people that not just support them, but also that they revolve their lives around. So that word connected is really what I thought about through those three lenses. So students who are connected to schools and connected to the school districts and divisions that they go to school in, students who are connected and feel a sense of warmth and invitation, schools where they are running to go into school as opposed to waiting for that bell at the end of the day to ring or counting down towards, the winter break, the spring break, the next summer break. And so instead of rushing out of schools, they're actually running to get to school because they are connected to those environments. They're connected to the experiences that they're getting. They're connected to the engagement, and most importantly, they're connected to the people. They're connected to the adults who care for them, but also they're connected to their classmates and their other schoolmates because of the conditions and because of the environment that has been created by that entire school community when we're thinking it down to the granular level of the school, but really starting at that district level. So connected to their school experience. I also think it's important that they're connected to people, and that really becomes a future evidence-based state where they're dialed in with their network. So as students progress pre-K to 12 in the public education system, there are not just opportunities for them to develop competencies, not just opportunities for them to gain and earn credentials and workplace skills or even study skills to be ready for what's next for them, whichever path they take once they graduate, but also connections to their networks where they're beginning to meet people and to expand beyond their community, but also within their community. They're getting connections to lifelines. Like, who do I call besides my parents when I'm really in when I'm really in a jam? Who do I call as a navigator, or who's calling on me as a navigator to help me figure out how to behave in certain situations, whether or not that home unit is taking care of that for me. Those students are connected in that way to the people. And then also, as they develop that network and they have their lifelines and they have their navigators, so too they have people who help them by opening doors with and for them. So that's the connected to people piece that I think about. And for me, in my current role now, the thing that I think most about when it comes to being connected is to the curriculum. And I know that that word is very ubiquitous when it comes to school, but students for probably as long as they've been able to think freely in school. I envision this time when it was maybe my great grandparents and even my grandparents and probably even my parents. I've now reached that age where it was you go to school, you keep your mouth shut, you do what you're told to do, and that's it. There's no connection. Whether or not you can see yourself in the curriculum or you see the relevance, it doesn't matter. You just go, you learn the material, you take your tests, and you move on with life. But as we've gotten smarter in this education system, and as we're in this moment you talk about, Victoria, students are beginning, not just beginning, but they have started to question what does this mean to me? And not just when am I going to use this? Because we all got that when we were teachers. And I think even as a student, I was thinking, when am I going to use this or how's this relevant? But they're asking it in a deeper way that that is actually bucking the system and actually rethinking, do I really need school? And that is a very fundamental question that I hope we get to explore at some point today when it comes to the student mind as they're entering into this space. But when I think about that curriculum, I think about that curriculum as being connected not just to the students' current experiences, but also to future and potential experiences when they come down the road. And I do believe we're going to unpack this as we go, just, you and I having this conversation, Victoria. But the thing that I think the most about, I'm just going to kind of let my little cat out of the bag when it comes to curriculum, is curriculum that is heavily rooted in context. So instead of us having, the content eggshells, somebody used the metaphor, an egg crate model, where, if you picture eggs, the eggs are in the crate, and those eggs in the crates could be people, but it could also be content and curriculum areas where there's no overlap. And so a future evidence-based system, I really think through how it's heavily rooted in context, but also interdisciplinary and even transdisciplinary experiences where the curriculum overlap and they match so that the students can see those connections in real time with the curriculum, but heavily rooted in context. I think I don't remember what country it is, and I should have better prepared for this, but there's a country in Europe that uses context-based education on universal phenomenon. So universal phenomenon are the things that are actually occurring in the world become the basis for the curriculum, and you learn the different standards and the different content subjects through the lens of real-time universal phenomenon that is heavily context-based. So when I think about a future state of using that connected, I think about curriculum, I think about the school environment, and then I think about the people in which students will be connected. That's kind of the first layer. I don't know if you want me to stop, Victoria, or keep going, and we can just go back and forth. But I see three layers. And to me, that's really the first, but just really unpacking why I chose connected as my word, but also what we're thinking about when we're looking at that future ecosystem.
Thank you, Chris. So before we leave students, um, I know you've given me this word connected. You painted a picture. Maybe you did this intentionally, but like the picture I have now about this future education ecosystem is really all about the student. Like the student is in the center of it, right? That's who you're talking about, and you're driving. I have this mental model of rings, and the student is in the center, and the student, like I see it almost glowing and pulsing, and the student is driving their own experience through their connections and their interests, right? Because you talked about the grown-ups they're connected to. I'm going to put it in words in your mouth. They're connected to peer networks in the school. They're connected to their curriculum. And you put the important so what question on the table, which I find fascinating. And I want to just peel it back with you for a second before we dive further. And I know we have a lot to cover in 35 minutes. But can you describe for me, and spoiler alert, I've heard you talk about this before. Talk about these students as learners, how much autonomy they have or begin to have that might unfold. And because I have this vision about them driving learning in a way that maybe they don't now. And when I was listening to you, that's where my heart was going. And then I'm going to use the R word, but they become their own researchers themselves. Like, can you just talk about a vision for that a bit?
Yeah, I love that concept of student autonomy, student driven, this student as researcher, and I think that's its own, that word researcher is its own ecosystem. But I want to first start with this idea of of student driven. We hear a lot about data driven. I heard
Yeah, do.
George Couros once said it shouldn't be data driven. It should be student driven, data informed, and that stuck to me like very deeply. Like students are what's driving our decisions. Data just helps us inform. But when we're talking about student autonomy, obviously there has to be a level of maturity. So as students get older, there's more of a gradual release into their decisions, their interests, their explorations. They're driving it. I mean, obviously, when a kid gets into kindergarten, there's a whole lot of teacher directed things that needs to happen because a student who's 5 years old knows very little about what it is that they want to explore, what they want to become, but it's wide enough open and teacher guided in such a way that allows that freedom that doesn't box a student in. So I think for me, it starts with a well-informed teacher. And obviously within a district, within a school, but in that classroom, regardless of the student's age, the teacher who knows the students first, and asks the question, "Who do I teach?" before they ask the question, "What do I teach?" is the teacher who becomes well informed enough to be able to guide and give some buffers without boxing in. And so when it's very much teacher directed, these are the standards, this is what we're doing today, this is the agenda, this is the time we stop, this is the time we start, we stop, just very structured, which is what we need. And students thrive in structured environments. And it has to be that way because we've got a lot of kids to educate in a 13-year, 14-year period of time. So all of those things to be considered, but starting first with knowing our students, with knowing our kids. Once we know who they are, what makes them tick, their goals, their dreams, their likes, their dislikes, their social norms, their cultural constructs, like that whole really understanding our students is what allows a teacher to take the curriculum, to take the instruction, to take the assessment, and build in opportunities for it to be student driven, for them to determine, for them to be the drivers. I love the word you use, to be the drivers of that educational support. And students as researchers, the thing is I mean, even gosh, I'm 48, Victoria, and I don't know what I don't know. So if somebody helps me to peel back the onion, there might be a whole nother career out there waiting for me that I'm not even imagining. I mean, it happened to me with the Army. You mentioned my military service earlier. I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's the thing with students is I go to school, I do what I'm told to do. The teachers, they tell me what to do. The bell rings. I go to where I'm supposed to go. But the more we open the things up, the more we allow and we build into the students' experiences for them to become researchers of self, knowing my identity. Who am I? What do I love? What is my purpose? Knowing more about what's out there. What are my interests? What are my passions? What is it that drives me, that gets me out of bed, that would get me excited, and research things of that nature. But I would start with the teacher. Before a student could ever become a researcher of any of that, a researcher of self and identity, a researcher of interests and what else is out there, a research into what it is that I'm interested in, that teacher as researcher, and the first question the teacher asks as a researcher is, who do I teach? Having the research tools to answer that question, I think unlocks our future ecosystem.
Okay. You're on fire. And I love it. So I was going to ask you, and I still want to, can you give me a word to describe um, the grown-ups in the system? Let's pivot to these grown-ups. Teacher, and you said well informed, so I don't know if that's going to be a word, but I wrote it down a minute ago. What is the word for teachers, for principals, and then for district leaders? Like, what are these grown-ups like?
All right. So teachers, I think, yes, I think it is well informed, but I think it goes beyond that. Like I think about how do you get well informed, and then how do you use that well informed information to then put that in play. So I would choose intentional is my word for teachers. Extremely intentional in their efforts as researchers, in their efforts as teachers, and in their efforts as supporting the whole child. I think our school leaders, like principals and assistant principals, have to be highly collaborative in this future ecosystem, highly collaborative. And if I can just steal a second word, communicative. So it kind of goes in the same realm of collaboration, but I think the the higher, let me just say this. I I don't have any data to support this. I just heard somebody say it one time, like 90% of our problems are communication, or come from poor communication. But like school leaders as collaborative, it would be my word there. And then I think district leaders cannot stem away from, yes, they've got to have one eye on now, but they also have to have one eye on next. And so I would say visionary has to be the word for district leaders. So as we're really unpacking what we're doing now, we also have to have that eye on what's next. So, Wayne Gretzky, I think one the hockey player. If you don't know who Wayne Gretzky is, look him up. He's considered to be the greatest hockey player of all time. He said, "My secret to success is I don't go where the puck is, I go where the puck is going to be." And I think as district leaders, we owe and we have a responsibility to the students and to the school communities in which they learn and grow to go to where the puck is going to be.
Okay, thank you. So let me pivot a little bit and ask that we peel that back. So what I have is teachers are intentional, principals are highly collaborative and communicative, and district leaders must be visionary.
Yeah.
All right. So now help me understand. Describe these grown-ups, these adults who are essentially leading our students in the future. Describe them more now. How are they working together and what's it going to take? What's different about them in the future than today?
I think educators are, um, I want to say that by nature, educators are very much service oriented. I used to think of it as a teacher doesn't choose teaching, teaching chooses them. And especially when you think about teachers who come into the profession and they're educators for life. That is their thing because it was their calling. They didn't choose it, they were chosen. I think as service oriented humans, I still think there's an elevated importance that in the future ecosystem, we're hyper people centered. And so when we talk about empathy, when we talk about listening and we talk about communication and we talk about understanding the wholeness of the human, I think the more we become people centered, teachers are people centered for students, school leaders are people centered for teachers and for students, district leaders are people centered for their communities. If we put people in the center, like you were mentioning it earlier, students are at the center and it's kind of radiating out. The future ecosystem for the adults, it has to be people centered, and that requires its own set of skills. At one time it was called soft skills. I don't think anybody calls them soft skills anymore. I hope they don't. I mean, I don't. I think they're extremely important skills that as a very much human centered profession, the adults have to become people centered. I also think of, I mentioned communication just a moment ago. I also think that we have to become hyper communicators. In which case,
Mm.
I think it's one thing to, um, yeah, communication is not enough is what I'm trying to say because of all of the means and all of the access that we have now. At one time, people got their information because they came to the PTA night. Like that was really the only time that there was two-way communication between the home and the school. Now we've got the phone calls that go home. We've got the text messages. We've got the emails. We've got the newsletters. We've got the social media. Information travels fast, and school leaders and teachers and district leaders who are able to be hyper communicative are able to tell the story. You can build a culture through telling the story using high communication. A well informed faculty and staff, when we're talking about the adults, a well informed faculty and staff is one that will be much more committed to the vision because that communication is two-way, it's open, it's clear, it's concise, it's respectful. Communication has to be respectful, and above all, before the communication can even become a skill, there is a disposition of transparency that needs to exist. And so the more transparent our district and our school leaders can become with the adults, the more information that's going to flow, the higher the competency and the greater levels of trust. If you haven't read Speed of Trust yet, please write that book down. It's Stephen Covey's son. I think I don't know if it's the M.R. Covey or the M. Covey, but it's Stephen Covey's son. But it's called The Speed of Trust. That book is a must read for anyone who decides to go into leadership, no matter what field you're in. Anyways, I wanted to say that point about communication. But the most important thing, and when I talked about district leaders being visionary, having this people centered and having communication, I talk a lot about commitment. And the difference between commitment and buy-in is really a point in time. Thanks, Janine. I appreciate that. Is really the point in time in which you bring the people in to the decision. So let's say that the decision is going to be made on day X. I have to make this decision on day X. If you bring the people in after that decision is made, you are now a salesman who has to go for buy-in. But if you bring your people in well before the decision, they have input, their voices on the table, their values are part of it. If your people build the vision, they are much more likely when that decision is made to commit to making that vision become a reality. And so I think as we talk about drilling down into those individual skills and those abilities, creating a unified vision, a shared vision, and a shared understanding of a future state, a leader's ability to be able to create that is going to be absolutely paramount. Because if I sit here and I paint this picture for you, Victoria, and I walk into a school district as a superintendent, I say, this is what we're going to do, it's going to fail on day one because nobody built it. I just came in with that vision. But if I instead took, I don't know, X amount of days to figure out from the people what it is that we're looking for, and we get into this in just a second. But if I'm really able to rally an entire school community behind a shared vision, we're going to make that happen.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I love it. So, is it too much if I put the word out there? Is it too far if I say, are you talking about a mindset shift?
Mm.
Is that a bridge too far? Are we going to mindset shifts?
So I want to say just a word on mindset. I don't. That is a very hard question for me to ask because I'm in the business of skill building. So that I've heard the phrase, is it will or is it skill? Like, do you want to build a shared vision? Do you have the mindset, or you have the mindset, but you just don't know how to do it? And so I don't know if it's will or skill, Victoria. So like I would love to, I mean, if we had time to unpack this right now, this idea of mindset, I do think it's a mindset shift. Let me just say that outright. But if you talk to a leader and you talk to a leader about high quality communication, if you talk to a leader about building a shared vision and who's going to say no? Like everyone would want to do that but if you say, okay, yes. So if you agree with that, if you understand the difference between buy-in and commitment, buy-in is not enough. We shouldn't be aiming for buy-in. As a matter of fact, I don't use that word in my own, my own leadership because I'm not a salesman. I'm not going to make a decision and try to sell you on it. Instead, I want to involve you in the decision-making process so that when it comes time, you are committed. So I think it is a mindset, but I think more than mindset, Victoria, because who doesn't believe that commitment is a greater aim than buy-in? Who would argue with that? If you ask any leader what they're struggling with, sometimes 9 times out of 10, the words buy-in are going to come out of their mouths. But I don't know if it's a mindset shift. It could be. But I in my experiences, people understand that need. It's just, how do I make that happen, Chris? Like, I get that question so much. Well, how do I do that? And I smile. I'm glad you asked. Let's roll up our sleeves and get into that, because the answer is not easy. It's highly complex because we're dealing with people. When you're dealing with people, it's all complex. Beyond just dealing with people, not dealing, I'm sorry, working with people, you're also working with children. And so when we're talking about humans and also small humans, it is absolutely complex. So the answer is not easy. In my experiences, it's more on the skill side than the will side, but it is an absolute, when we're talking about system wide change, yes, very much a mindset shift.
Okay. So let's pull up to the what I think of as the organizational level. We've been talking about people and describing people in the system. And now I want to talk about organizational level changes if we can. And it for me, like I'll plant the seed with you. It seems like organizations are going to have to districts as organizations, right? I'm thinking, or divisions if we're in the state of Virginia, as organizations. Professional development, teacher prep. Like, can you unpack that? Like, where are we? What's that new ecosystem going to look like in order to facilitate and support the people that you've just described?
Yeah, I think I think that's multifaceted. Obviously, at the district as an organization cannot be um, a siloed a siloed ecosystem. So I think there's going to have to be opportunities to build relationships with local teacher prep programs. I think there's going to have to be relationships that are developed with the local businesses, depending on the environment in which you're working in this school district. So teacher prep programs, preparing teachers to be intentional, talking about who do I teach before I really master what do I teach. So thinking about the student first before I even think about what that curricular objective is going to be. Those relationships are extremely important, and then also the partnerships that districts are able to lead. So in addition to a district being that the district leaders being visionary and the principals being highly collaborative, that's where those partnerships and those relationships form. Because I don't know that a future ecosystem can exist as its own silo anymore. I don't think it can now, and it definitely won't be able to in the future. So when we think about professional development models, I think we have to think about things that become highly granular, a very tiny specific skill that is mastered before we build onto it with either another skill or a connecting skill. Uh, I think in that future set, if it's highly granular, and I become let's say something like I don't know, formative assessment comes to mind. Mastering formative assessment moves is not as granular as what I'm thinking, but I don't want to build on or attach something or move to another skill until that skill is absolutely mastered. Um, I feel like in the future ecosystem, that professional development model isn't just like, okay, here are all the things that we're going to pile on. Let's go get good at all of these things. And we don't get good at any of them. It's like aiming for the middle and missing everything. And so I think getting very granular and super specific to the needs and demographics of the district, the school, the classroom. So when we're talking about things that are very super specific, in the past, professional development was either, a motivational speaker coming in at the end of August during the teacher in service week. Hoorah, everybody's excited. Now go to your classroom and change the world. Zero follow up. So it's like the chocolate Easter bunnies we used to get at Easter. It's the hollow bunny that's like sweet on the outside, looks good, but there's nothing, no substance in the middle. Um, so and also going to conferences. I mean, I'm an organization that literally puts on conferences. So there is absolute value in bringing people together. It's more important to develop those networks and the skills while you're there. But the future of professional development is moving much more into things that are ongoing and very specific. So instead of you going to professional development comes to you. That experience is built around the unique needs that you're facing, the problems that you're seeing, and the demographics of your school, your district, your classroom. I think as you mentioned the word researchers earlier, as adults become more and more, especially teachers, better at researching, they're developing granular skills. They're learning more about the specific needs of the students in front of them right now, not last year's students, not that student's younger brother, not that, and if you've been around long enough like me, not that student's mom. I taught your mother. So I think being very, researchers and experts of their people and the needs that they have, but over time, having folks who are able to develop expertise in certain areas that they're needed to, I don't want to say come in, parachute in, but somebody coming in from outside the school who doesn't have that vested interest, who hasn't, I'm too deep in it, to help move through over time, granular and specific to the context. I think those begin to make up a future professional development model that's there, in addition to a different set that is a little bit, because it's granular, it can also be bite-sized, and it can also be on demand. So I think those two things, when we're talking about, I'm looking at the time, professional development models that are granular and specific to the context, but also on demand. So I can, I can have it in my ear as a podcast while I'm washing the dishes, but it's also granular and bite sized. Like I've got 15 minutes to do anything, but if you ask me to go to a 2-hour training, like we're done. So, so those are the ground professional development models.
All right. So, Chris, we could talk 2 hours plus. So, allow me to just pull us up to the systems level for a minute. All right. Tackle people. We'll talk a little bit about organizations and just the idea that professional development will look different in this future ecosystem. And teacher prep will too. So, at the systems level, can you tell me what our audience and people who are aspiring to create such an evidence-based education ecosystem should be thinking about in terms of systemic changes? What do we need to think about there?
Yeah, I think about, so when I think about the system, I think about the system as a box, and the box is created through law and policy. So I think about, at the federal level, the interest in education. I think about at the state level, the state government's interest in education, and then obviously the locality and the district. And I think about the difference between legislation slash law and policy. Like I think of them as two different things. And the reason I do is because, state lawmakers, they they create conditions that make the system. The local school boards will create policy to determine how we're going to operate within that system. And then obviously the practitioner follows the law, follows the policy, but there's sometimes a gap or a misalignment that in the future state of this ecosystem that we're talking about, there has to be a clear alignment. So if the system, i.e. the laws and policy, are one half of the Velcro, that Velcro has to be rooted in evidence-based education, this very thing that we're talking about right now. What is best for students when it comes to curriculum? What is best for students when it comes to instruction? What is best for students when it comes to assessment? What is best for students when it comes to school and community culture? What is best for students when it comes to infrastructure? What is best for students when it comes to whole child support and whole child development? If we've got alignment and it's one half of the Velcro, then every teacher in wherever, whatever we're talking about here, whether that's nationwide, statewide, district, if we've got that half of a Velcro, a teacher can tack their practice onto that Velcro all day long because it's aligned. It's aligned to what is best evidence so that we create the system, what is best and supported by evidence so that we can operate within the system. It's not about, to me, it's not about thinking outside the box. It's about operating within the box. And when that box is aligned with best practices and evidence-based ecosystem that we're talking about now, when we create that system through policy and through law, then I'm not going to say it makes it easier because teaching is very hard. It's the hard, I believe it's the hardest thing that, I mean, I've had quite a few careers in my time, but it's extremely difficult. But when the box aligns with what research-based and evidence-based practices tell me to do, then we're good. When we have alignment, we can all move as one, as opposed to what sometimes might happen with either overreaching or not really understanding and creating policy that's not rooted in best practice or in research or evidence-based practices. And then when we're trying to do those things, it's going against the policy or against the law. So when we're working in collaboration and when we look at the box that's created through policy and through legislation that is rooted in evidence-based, then that ecosystem can operate effectively. And ultimately, it's the kids who are going to benefit.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I'm mindful of the time. And so rather than, toss a question back to you, I'm going to open it up to the people who are with us. And we have about 7 minutes left. Do we have any questions for Chris? Those of you who are in our audience, thank you for joining us. Questions for Chris about anything you heard this afternoon? You can put them in the chat. And I want to acknowledge Janine. Thank you. We appreciate that you helped us with Stephen M.R. Covey. Appreciate that name for the book that Chris referenced. And then I'll acknowledge that Marilyn Miles Gray also put a comment in the chat earlier, which is pretty profound. The unconsciously incompetent person doesn't know what they don't know. Yeah. The consciously incompetent person knows that they don't know. Gray's 4-level model of competence. I need to look that up. So thank you for that tip. Any questions from anybody? All right. So while we're waiting, in case somebody does pose a question in the chat, I want to acknowledge that one of my colleagues who could not be here today asked me if there was time, if I could ask a question. So I am just going to look over at my notes to make sure I get her question right. Oh, yeah, I remember now. And they predicted that we were going to have a lot of new information on the table, and they did that accurately. They said, how do we ensure that we don't wind up adding more to educators' plates and instead give them the tools to use what they already collect, what they already know to inform instructional improvement? How do we ensure we're not making their lives harder? Chris, that is an important question.
Yeah, I think this is probably why I chose the word intentional when it came, my word for teachers to be intentional. I don't think we're doing the things that we need to do effectively because we haven't taken the time to create that Velcro. So as opposed to just piling on and continuing to say, okay, do this, do this, do this, let's take a step back because I think it's an intersection of going back to the basics, but it's a place of getting better at the granular skills that I mentioned. So the better we get at the granular skills and the better we are at tacking and making connections to what is most effective, we actually cut a lot of the fat out because I do think we're doing things that we don't need to do. I also think I want to take this second to just point out that when I talked about creating a shared vision, those 3 questions that every leader should ask their people all the time is to keep, stop, start. What are we doing well that we need to keep doing? So let's keep these things on the plate. What are we doing that's not working that we need to stop doing? So let's take those off the plate. and what are we not doing that we need to start, whether that's doing creating more effective systems or making the things a little bit more aligned and intentional so that when I row the boat, it's going in the direction that we're navigating, as opposed to everyone just putting their oars in the water without anything. There's no building of the boat. There's no determining what river to get into. There's no determining of direction or destination. It's just, all right, guys, we're going to row the boat. So I think there's a huge difference. And when we're talking about intentionality, collaboration, and being visionary, those three words that I had for the adults at the different levels, that's what I was thinking about, Victoria.
I appreciate that. I wrote that down too. That's just great. So, knowing that we only have a couple of minutes left, Chris, I'll just turn to you. Is there anything that you can reflect and wish that you had said that you didn't say? I'll give you the floor for another minute.
Yeah, I think one thing that we didn't touch on was AI.
Yeah.
And of course, AI is going to play a part in the future evidence-based ecosystem for education. So our organization, very early on, we published the position paper on AI. It was very information based, and then here are the steps to take. We've now that we've got more information with AI, AI is expanding almost daily. There are executive orders out there at the state level and at the federal level, and where AI is going to live. I think so for me, when we're talking about district leadership and district level ecosystem, the two things that districts can do when we're talking about AI, number one is to take time to really not just understand AI, but to develop the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that today's students will need in order to coexist with AI. So whatever that set of knowledge, skills, and dispositions are needs to be part of the curriculum. AI is not going away. The highly skilled individual who can coexist and interact with AI is going to be the employable one, the one who is successful and whatever that means. So developing a set of knowledge, skills, and dispositions and allowing that to become part of the curriculum. So building students up to a world with AI. And then also for the districts who are extremely fearful of data breach and exposing students to like bad AI, something like Chat GPT can absolutely be replicated and housed within a school district or a small group of regional school districts where they can create their own AI apps. So if a school district or a group of smaller rural school districts get together and they create their own AI app, it could replicate what the AI is doing in the big system. It can still happen, but it can happen under a protected network umbrella that protects us from all of the things that we're fearful of when it comes to AI. So those are the two things that we're really pushing our organization is get your curriculum up to speed with what students will need to coexist with AI, but then also consider building your own apps so you can protect and have things in-house.
I'm so glad that you took a minute to mention AI. And that is a nice segue to acknowledge to all of our guests that on August 26th, our fourth and final panel discussion is going to focus on the future of AI in education in relation to this ecosystem. So thanks, Chris, for mentioning that at the end, because it really is an important and exploding area within education. And it is a lot of opportunity to form it. It is not yet fully defined. So, Chris, thank you for taking time today. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us and your vision with us.
Yeah.
And to all of those who joined us, thank you as well. I hope to see you in 3 weeks on August 26th, right back here at 3:30. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.